Hey. Hello. Hey. Well, look at you all. Thanks. Sure. Oh, you have. Hey, lovely.
Okay. I have a brief introductory paragraph. Hello, everybody. I'm amongst a lot of friends here, actually, which is very nice. So, thank you for joining the Marlowe Society this afternoon.
Thank you, Nick.
We've been walking around Cambridge and visited the ADC this afternoon, but I think Cambridge has always been a major city throughout your life, not just this afternoon, throughout your lives and works. It serves as the backdrop for your first novel, The Liar, and there's a brilliant scene set in the University Library where you encounter, or rather the protagonist encounters, Germaine Greer and Stephen Hawking. Yes. And you wrote your first play, Latin, for the Corpus Playroom.
Yeah.
Is that correct? Yeah. You made your first film appearance as an extra in Cambridge set Chariots of Fire, although I think part of that was set in Eton or filmed
College,
in Eton.
yes, it was.
And whilst you were supposed to be studying English at Queen's, as you phrase it in the Fry Chronicles, you instead spent most of your days and nights in amateur dramatic productions at the university.
Yeah.
You were in the Footlights, but your student credits also extended greatly into plays, including Don Adranio de Amado.
Yeah.
You can probably do.
Don Amado.
Yes.
I gave him the Mexican accent because I could not do Spanish. Every time I tried Spanish, it would become Russian for some reason. But he's described as a fantastical Spaniard in the dramatist personae, so I made him fantastical. Yeah. And Hugh Laurie played the king, and he had never done a play before. Hugh had a strange time at Cambridge because he came to row. He came from a rowing family. His father won a gold medal at the Berlin Olympics, and he had rowed at school, and he'd rowed for the Junior Olympics himself. And he came, and he had in his first year, he had glandular fever, so he couldn't row. So he went to Eton. So somebody said, "You're really funny. Actually, I remember you at school. You're really funny. You should join the Footlights because you're really funny." So he joined the Footlights in his first year, and then his second year he rowed in the boat race, and he claimed that he tossed a coin to be either president of the Footlights or president of the Cambridge University Boat Club. He came down Footlights, so he joined the Footlights. But I persuaded him to be in a play, and it was Love's Labour's Lost at the Arts Theatre for the Marlowe. And I wasn't in the opening scene, which you may know is the king telling all the lords that they've got to go and live in a forest and abjure women. Let fame that all hunt after in their lives live registered upon our brazen tombs, and then grace us with the disgrace. 50 years ago. Anyway, he and Paul Schlesinger, who played Barone, couldn't, it happens in theatre, they couldn't meet each other's eyes without laughing, corpsing as it's called. They just simply he could not get through the opening speech without laughing. And the director, Bridget Lama, very fine director, then had to have everybody saying the speech as a chorus, because it's the only way it could be done. Yeah. But he used to make me laugh. He hides, and there was a set which was kind of painted. It was deliberately stylized. Say things like, with the exact right lines, but he would say them in a way that didn't sound like Shakespeare, because he'd been overhearing the lords who were betraying the oath they took to abjure women and had been seen secretly. And he overhears it, and he comes out, and he would say, "I have been closely shrouded behind this bush." What he would go and say. Anyway, sorry, that was the only example of Hugh Laurie as a serious actor. Until, of course, House and Night Manager and his current brilliance.
What I like about the first meeting between you and Hugh Laurie is I think it was you wrote a song together.
Yes, it was extraordinary. in my second year, I'd written that play Latin that you
Yeah.
mentioned that was on
Yeah.
it sort of christened the playroom, at the Corpus Playroom. And the Mummers decided to take it to Edinburgh.
Yes. Yeah.
And Hugh came to see it, though I didn't know who he was. He was a fellow who came to see it. And he said, hello. And I said, hello. And that was sort of it. And I forgot all about him. And then at the beginning of the next term, Emma Thompson, who was a very good friend and I'd known all the time, said, you've got to meet Hugh. He's become president of the Footlights. And I said, have I seen him in anything? She said, no, I don't think he would have done. He was an oarsman. He was rowing. I said, oh, okay. Slave or a convict. And I was rather snooty about rowing. It is a strange thing to do when there are. I mean, anyway, so so she took me around. He was at Selwyn. She took me around to his rooms and knocked on the door. And his girlfriend, Katie, opened the door and he was sitting on a bed and said, hello. And I said, hello. And he had a guitar and he was writing a song. Yeah. So he said, I've just been writing this song. And he started singing. He said, I don't know how it should go on. So I sat down next to him and we worked out some extra lyrics. And we finished the song. And then he picked up a piece of paper and we started writing a sketch together. And we suddenly noticed Emma and Katie were staring at us like this. And we said, what? They said, you haven't actually introduced yourselves to each other. We literally started writing without any introduction. It was the most magical and remarkable thing. Yeah. And we carried on doing it for the rest of the year, writing for the Footlights Late Night and then the May Week Review, which went to Edinburgh. Yeah. And Edinburgh was interesting. Can I tell the Edinburgh story? Because obviously, this happened to be the first year that the Edinburgh Festival had this comedy award that then was called the Perrier Award. And we heard about it. And so we said, there's a comedy award. And they said, well, it won't go to us because, if there is a thing that everybody says within Cambridge and outside Cambridge every year, it's apparently Footlights are crap this year. It's a thing you have to say. Everybody says it. Oh God, they're crap. Yeah. So and of course at Edinburgh, everybody hates you. You're from Cambridge, for fuck's sake. Absolutely loathed. So anyway, we did this show, and it was, to be fair, it did go very well. And then there was one night where we were taking a bow, and the audience was very enthusiastic usually, and cheered and clapped. But this time they went absolutely nuts. We thought, what's going on? This is weird. And something caught my eye, and I turned around, and this man holding something walked forward, and he was someone who'd just become very famous, and it was Rowan Atkins. And he said, if I can, I would want to say. And he explained that we'd won this award, which was bizarre. And it involved performing in London. And the next night, someone came around from the BBC asking if they could put it on television, our Footlights Review. And we became, this is extraordinary. The night after that, somebody came, this sounds like showing off, but it really was bafflement. That someone came, an Australian, saying, do you want to tour Australia? So we said yes. So we toured Australia, and we agreed to tour Australia. And the night after that, someone came from ITV saying they wanted to put together a sketch show on ITV. And they asked me and Emma and Hugh to be in it. And they got someone from Glasgow art school who had just graduated that they thought would be good, who was Robbie Coltrane. He joined it. Yes. And someone from Manchester University was Ben Elton, and we did this series. So Cambridge as a launch pad, it was preposterous. I mean, we genuinely thought it was impossible, because when you're a student, there's the club room, and on the walls there's John Cleese and Peter Cook and all the goodies, and people who, for my generation, were kind of comedy gods. And it was perfectly obvious we would never come anywhere close to that or get an opportunity. So we'd all made plans. I was going to stay on at Cambridge and grow tweed in a cloister somewhere and teach Shakespeare. And Hugh had this idea he wanted to join the Hong Kong police force. It was really bizarre. At that point, the British owned Hong Kong. It was what was known as a crown colony. And he'd read an article that there was corruption in the police force. So he saw himself as this kind of cleansing figure who would... And I said, you do realise you have to wear white shorts with an ironed crease down it? He said, oh, bollocks, I can't do it. So but anyway, we all thought that it was impossible to make that move. And we were just incredibly lucky in timing. I think that's as you know, comedy timing is supposed to be a thing, but there's, in a wider sense, the good fortune. So I'm sure lots of you will might have plans to do, to go on in showbiz, and you probably will. But the most important thing is the friendship. It's that my friendship with Emma and you was absolutely instrumental in everything that happened. You just spend all your time together. You can do certain things on your own. You can write a play on your own. You can direct on your own. But I don't think you can do comedy on your own. You just have to have, as somebody once said to us, I suppose, what do? You just sit around and spark each other off. It sounds a bit weird, but yes, I suppose we do. We spark each other off.
Do you think it's a different discipline between something like Footlights and a Shakespeare play, even a Shakespeare comedy? Do you think you require different skills as a performer?
I think you have to be more serious and straight when you're doing comedy.
Right.
And it's a self-consciously paradoxical answer, but it's almost true.
Yeah.
I for my first 2 years, I did nothing but plays, and because I was tall and have a deepish voice and never looked under, and never looked over. Which do I mean? I never looked under 50. Basically, I felt, I never felt I was young, so I was always cast as a king, in Love's Labour's Lost. And sometimes the king's a rather dull role. No,
and your shows at Bats as well.
Yeah, and in Bats, yes, King of Navarre in All's Well with Emma, I remember. And sometimes he's a warty old fool who blesses the lovers in the fifth act. Mummers, I was in 5 different shows every day for the Mummers. It was fantastic. And I really never imagined that I would do comedy. There was a bit of snootiness about the Footlights to some extent in the ADC and the Mummers and things. But the great thing about Hugh is that he, as president, he sort of informed it with this, seriousness isn't the word, but it was just, it wasn't being all larky.
Yeah.
And it was before stand-up. I remember stand-up was happening in the alternative world. Alexei Sale and these figures were starting a new kind of American, I suppose, form of stand-up. And I remember you and I came up with this idea of doing a stand-up where you just, being fucking better was late yesterday. What can a Cambridge student say that as a stand-up when you have the most privileged life on earth? You just, so you can't really say much, really. So sketches, all of ours was, come in, and Perkins, sit down, it's all that sort of sketches. Those are more like acting. Because if you're a stand-up, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be a good actor. Some stand-ups don't transition to film acting. And in America, you can see the ones who do this, and they're astounding. Richard Pryor and all that, Robin Williams and Steve Martin and so on, who were wonderful, and all the way up through Steve Carell, and many of them did. But there are plenty who either don't want to or just don't fit it, because being a stand-up isn't acting necessarily. You're often just being a magnified version of yourself.
Yes, I think another famous sketch show you did with Hugh Laurie intersected, I think, Shakespeare and your comedic skits.
Yes.
Traitors and Cressida.
Yes, Act 3, Scene 5, whatever it was, the time hath my lord a wallet at his back. Yeah, we did this Shakespeare masterclass sketch where I was the teacher and Hugh was this gormless actor. And I said, well, what have you got for us? And he would say, I've got the Ulysses speech from Traitors and Cressida. I said, right, let's try it out, shall we? And he would go, time hath my lord a wallet at his back, wherein I go, Hugh, stop me there. What's the first word? What's the word that Shakespeare decides to begin his sentence with there? He goes, time. Yes, time. And we basically work on the word time for about 10 minutes. It's awesome. But it did, it somehow was it sounds pathetic the way I did it. But it went very well, and the Royal Shakespeare Company does it at in their fundraisers, so it's still alive somewhere.
Yeah. I think the next step is backwards, I think. What were I have it phrased here as the warning signs that theatre would be the path that you'd go on. Were there any formative experiences or theatrical performances which you saw, which said, that's what I want to do now?
When I was young, yes, I absolutely wanted to be an actor. And from the age of 11, 12, 13, I would just, when people at, grown-up drinks parties would say, well, young man, what are you going to do when you grow up? And I would say, I'm going to be an actor. And I remember one, coming back from one, and my mother said in the car, she said, darling, don't you think perhaps really that you'd like to be a barrister? Because it's like being an actor. And for Christmas, she gave me a book by a High Court judge. It was called 10 Great Advocates, and it was potted biographies of great lawyers. And so for a time, I read about these, and I practiced putting a hand on one hip. Do you seriously expect the jury to believe? And I would do all this sort of thing. And I kind of fancied the idea. But deep inside, I wanted to be an actor. And when I said it to people, I could see they'd look at me. I was rather gawky and thin, if you could imagine it. And I never had any sense that I was particularly good looking or charismatic. And I kind of sensed people looked at me and felt that too. And so I kind of really... I thought probably the voice. I did like speaking. I did like voices. I loved voices of actors. I would do impressions of Alec Guinness and Olivier and Gielgud and things like that. And it was their voices. Absolutely, there was something magnetic to me about the human voice, and I would practice doing things with the voice. And so I thought I'd go into radio, because the old BBC Radio 4 had a repertory company, and I thought I'd get away with that, because I didn't like the physical stuff. I hate, there were a lot. By the time I got to Cambridge, a lot of the directors would make you do warm-ups and things, and I don't absolutely hate it. I mean, to this day, Professor, I've just finished a 4-month run in the West End, and all the other actors would do these warm-ups, and they'd stretch themselves and do things and noises and things like that. They were all, I could have been their grandfather, all of them. They were all very young, and every single one of them had days off through illness, and they twisted an ankle or broken a leg or anything like that. I did absolutely no exercises at all, nothing, and I did not miss a single performance. And I just think it's bullshit. Absolute bullshit. But it's some people, why are you doing that? You're going to be a real person. Real people don't do that before they act. I didn't do that before talking to you.
I did. I was
It's so strange. But probably there's some directors in there saying, you bastard. I know what's going to happen now when I next do a rehearsal, because half the rehearsal is doing warm-ups and throwing balls at each other. Sorry, I just hate all that. It's probably, there's a deep part of me that is ashamed of my body and ashamed of, so, I'm fully aware that it is a, but then I think that's true of so many real people in the world. And so the parts that suit me are people like that, like Malvolio, because although an actor is supposed to be able to play anything, you transform yourself, in the end, you whatever you are, you've got your own legs and your own hands. And there are certain roles that suit certain people and don't suit other people. And you hope that you're the kind of person where there'll be a fairly wide range. And I've always, for some reason, played figures in authority, pompous figures, I wonder why. And so there's enough of those, and they're all a bit like me. They're probably a bit ashamed of their bodies and a bit, they don't do exercises. They're desk-bound, chair-bound, and emotionally constipated in one way or another, which is how a lot of people are. And a lot of the best plays explore that kind of thing, the closed emotions and so on. So, to be all kind of, I think you like this, and then play someone who's like that seems to me absurd. But maybe I'm wrong.
I think across, as you're talking about those warm-ups, it made me think, how has theatre changed throughout the time that you've been a part of it? I mean, starting in, was Cambridge Theatre 45 years ago? How's it now in 2026?
Well, from the very brief tour I had of the ADC that you kindly let me go around and see them, and they were doing a tech rehearsal for Into the Woods, and I spoke to the staff there, you know, the permanent people there. It seems a lot more professionally organised. I mean, it was always fabulous, and it's no accident that this great line of directors like, you know, Peter Hall and Richard Eyre and Trevor Nunn and Nick Heitner and Sam Mendes and so on, all because the experience you get in this university is staggeringly better than any drama school could possibly offer. The amount and variety of things you do and how you learn from people your own age, and you can just, you know, rather than being bossed around by some tosser in a scarf. You know, honestly, I mean, when I wrote Latin, this play, and it was very nicely won an award at Edinburgh, and this producer wanted to do it at the Lyric Hammersmith, and I was doing with Hugh and Emma and Ben and Robbie, we were doing a series, the ITV series, and so I couldn't be in it. It was a two-hander, and I'd written one part for myself, and the other part was for an older man, and they cast that. They couldn't cast my part, and so I said, well, I know this sounds really crap, but there was someone I was at university with who's at drama school now, who's really good. He's called Simon Beale, but he's Simon Russell Beale now is known as Sir Simon Russell Beale, who's one of the great stage actors. And I always knew he was good, and we were in Volpone together and various other things, and he really was very good. And he'd gone to Guildhall to do opera and singing, because he's an extraordinary musical. But he changed and did drama. So the directors thought, oh God, I'm supposed to do a university friend. Well, I'll go and see him. And he saw him, he thought, oh my God, he's brilliant. So he went to Tony Church, who ran Guildhall, and this is drama school. He said, well, I understand it's a real opportunity for Simon. He'll get his equity card, and that's good. But he will miss certain classes. We're covering Chekhov at the moment, so I am duty-bound to warn him that if he does the play, it's going to leave a hell of a hole in his Chekhov technique. What? I don't think I've ever heard a stupider remark made by him. As it happens, Simon has won 2 Olivier Awards, one for Uncle Vanya and one for the Cherry Orchard. So, I mean, it's... But if you can't get to Cambridge and or a university that has a good, you know, drama of this kind, and they're not many, to be honest. Even Oxford can't really match Cambridge in that way. Then, of course, a drama school is fine because you're with equals who love drama, and you go off and you see plays, and you talk theatre, and you talk. You know, when sometimes young people come and see me, or their parents send them, and they say, "I want to be in the theatre," and I say, "Which actors do you think are overrated?" And the ones who love theatre will have a view. They go, oh, you know, I've never thought she's that as good as everyone thinks she is. But the ones who go, oh, I don't know, you think, you're not really watching. You know, those of you who love theatre will think, I love that actor. Right? Or that one, I think. You know, they always annoyed me. It's perfectly reasonable. You know, I'll annoy lots of people. Every actor will have people who think they're no good or not their favourite or wouldn't go and see them. And others they do. But the kind of person who goes into theatre is the sort of person who is absorbed by it completely and loves it and talks about it and thinks about it and reads all the reviews online and you know just tries to go and see as much as they can, given how expensive theatre tickets are. And that's that's the most important thing. But you can develop that at Cambridge like nowhere else. And I'm always stunned by the plays that are put on here by playwrights I've never heard of, new playwrights or playwrights that are obscure and have been forgotten. And all of you have this gift of finding plays and putting them. And this was true in my time. So I remember a friend of mine, he said, I said, what are you doing? He said, I'm going to go apply to the ADC to do a late night play. I said, what is it? He said, it's called Sexual Perversity in Chicago. I said, yeah, it's by this new playwright called David Mamet.
Oh, I didn't know that.
He discovered David Mamet. I don't know how he did it, but he did. And he did Sexual Perversity in Chicago, which is a very early Mamet play, and it was absolutely stunning. And we all go, wow, where did that come from? Or you do some, uncover The Roaring Girl, for example, which is, now it's been done more, but I think it was one of the first times it had ever been done when Annabelle Arden did it with the Mummers that I was in.
Yes,
And so you go backwards and forwards. It's just this thrill of seeing what theatre is.
Yeah.
I mean, as we were saying earlier, It's a bit, it is beating a drum that everybody's beating at the moment. But one of the good things that might happen as a result of the tsunami of pollutant, of slop that is coming out from AI, is that your generation and the generation below you, which I believe is called Alpha for some reason, are losing more and more faith in the digital world and in its nonsense and in the fakery of it. And any live event, even this, but any live event, any theatre, and thank you, Timothy Chalamet, Ding Dong, anything live is all the more exciting, I think, to that generation, because you cannot fake it. There is no room for any fakery.
Yeah.
Whereas in the digital world now, there's almost no room for any truth. And it's not just that you're being lied to, it's even worse, you can't believe what's true. So you're just stuck with nothing but doubt and disappointment. So I think this is the beginning of a new age of live performance and new inventions of the way theatre can be, and it's in your hands. Yeah. I think that's fantastic.
That's what I was going to ask next. Do you think there are as many people who are like those theatrical fanatics that you described today as they were
That's
when
an
you
interesting point. I mean, it was probably easier to see theatre, and there was a lot more fringe theatre in London. There were a lot of these companies performing in pubs and things like the Bush in Shepherd's Bush, and all these shared experience and something space and all the and quite political theatres. Howard Brenton and all those sort of playwrights writing very, very political theatre and very stripped down. And there were lots of opportunities to go and see that sort of thing. There's less of that now.
Yes.
There's a lot more very expensive theatre.
Yes,
It's so expensive
yeah.
at the West End. It's unbelievably difficult
Yeah.
to put things on at anything other than a price that is really prohibitive for a lot of people. Although it's cheaper still than a Premier League football match that you can get.
I wouldn't know.
So I think young people being young people, they talk to each other and they you share excitements about things. So I think that the opportunities are all there.
Yeah. I have a question from the audience that was sent before, actually. Ooh. It's about Cambridge more broadly. It's from April. In what way do you think Cambridge has most changed since you were here?
Well, the reason I really had set my heart on Cambridge, I had a very bizarre adolescence. I didn't stab anybody, but I did go to prison. And it was while I was in prison that I realised that I'd missed doing exams and things because I'd run away from school, and I'd gone crazy with someone else's credit cards and all over the country, and eventually got caught up by the police and was in prison awaiting trial. I mean, I'd pleaded guilty, but the police had to collect paperwork from 6 different counties. So it was all very disgraceful. Anyway, so you picture me lying on the flagstones of the cell with the shadows of the bars thwart my back, and a rat crawling over me and sobbing into the straw, and vowing I will go to Cambridge. And why Cambridge? I had this sentimental but very strong affection for a certain kind of Cambridge of the early 20th century, the Cambridge of Bertrand Russell and E.M. Forster and Goldsworthy Lowes Dickinson and G. Moore, the Cambridge that inspired Bloomsburyism, which is rather fey and strange now, but I absolutely love the novels of E.M. Forster, and I, for some of my life he was still alive and at King's, and that the difference is when I got there was still a connection. There's someone I'll mention, Dady Rylands.
Yes.
You've probably heard of him.
Yes, of course.
If you're in the Marlowe Society, because he was one of the original great figures of them, and he was still alive when I was there, in his 80s. And I remember he would go to everything, and there was a production of Merchant of Venice at the Arts. And as we were going in, he saw me, he said, I don't believe that there is any possibility that a new production of Merchant of Venice will say anything that I haven't heard, but I go with an open mind. And in the interval, he said, I was wrong. This is wonderful, wonderful. He was so sweet. He was a lovely man. And he knew all these people. He knew Virginia Woolf.
Yeah, she wrote about him.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Was it really a show?
Yeah. I think in A Room of One's Own.
Oh yes, she did. Right. You're right. She did. Yes,
when
that's
she's
right.
talking,
And
he helped at the Hogarth Press. As
so
well.
there were these connections, and Queenie Leavis was still around, and I Richards, Leavis from this college, Leavis's wife, and who wrote Dickens the novelist with F.R. Leavis. So there was this connection. I was interested in the subject I was supposed to read, which was English, and as you know, if you read English, you don't have to do any work. You don't have to go to any lectures. I went to a lecture my first week. It was a man called J.W. Bennett, who was absolutely ancient, who was talking very slowly about the difference between the A text, the B text, and the C text of Piers Plowman. It was unbelievably boring. And then I did go to a very good lecture given by Stephen Heath of Jesus, who was the kind of cool Don at the time, because he was a friend of Roland Barthes and of Lacan, Foucault, and this was the beginning of the structuralism and then post-structuralism age. And he was rather wonderful. And otherwise, that was it. And the Dons understood this. You go to a supervision in your director of studies or whoever was, supposedly taking the supervision. You'd say, "So have you got that essay for me on Spencer?" Say, "Well, I'm thinking very hard about." I had this thought, and he said, "You're thinking very hard about the rehearsals you're going to, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "All right, off you go." And that would be it. I mean, it was kind of arrogance of Cambridge that they assumed if they let you in, you were smart, and therefore you would pass your exams, you'd get your finals, and there was no pressure. It was beginning to change because around the time I matriculated, and then the first year there was a new prime minister. Margaret Thatcher came to power, and she had she went to Oxford, science, but and law, which were vocational, and she didn't believe in education. She believed in vocation. If you understand the difference. If you're reading English or you're reading history, or you're sort of absorbing ideas about the past and about the human mind, true of philosophy, of course, obviously, and it's not training you for a job. You're not being trained. If you train someone, you're putting them on rails to be a lawyer or a doctor, which is fine. I'm not objecting to it. It's perfectly, but it's also important to have education, which is an all-round thing. And it's kind of unfair on people who are trained because they don't win. And so you have government like Thatcher's, which was trying to reduce education. That's happening even more now. And educational subjects, disciplines like English literature, the humanities, as they're sometimes called, are being pushed out more and more and more. And governments are saying, no, we need to train people for industry, to train them for jobs, to stamp out citizens who will have a job and be trained to do it. And the irony is that if you speak to anyone in a serious position in business or in broadcasting or anything like that, a broadcaster doesn't want someone who's read media studies. They'd much rather have someone who's read philosophy or classics because they're educated and they can sort of put their mind to anything, and they think, and they're open, and they're used to critical thinking, and they're not on rails. And training, you train a tree. You staple a pear tree against a wall. It's trained. And you want to grow free. And education makes you grow free. And I think that's what I loved about Cambridge. It was a place where you could be educated, and you educated yourselves. All your education comes from your sitting up late at night with wine and coffee or whatever, and smoking as we did in those days, and talking about whether there was a God, and saying all kinds of appallingly pretentious things. But nonetheless, someone will know something you don't, and that's what. If only everyone could have that experience, and it's embarrassing and unfair that we have it and you have it. You have an opportunity to talk and learn and engage with ideas and thoughts and take them up and drop them and reinvent yourself. And you're not on rails. You're not saying, no, if you want to be a lawyer, you must, this is what you must know. You must know the Carbolic Smoke Ball Company and tort and so on. And So, I mean, that's what appealed to me about Cambridge, and I think that's still there, but it's threatened. It's very threatened.
Yeah. And then once you leave Cambridge, your creative life continues prolifically, obviously.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask about, once you, reflecting back on all of that, your relationship has been productive, but how else would you describe it? During the process of creativity, is it fun or tedious or just your kind of 9-to-5 job? Or probably
it's never been that, I'm lucky enough to say. I think one of the advantages of the footlights, of course, is that without it being without it being training, but it just happens that without thinking about it, you write and perform. You write stuff for yourself to do, monologues to do. You write sketches with your writing partner, and sometimes one writing partner, sometimes 2 or 3. You write, pantomimes in the Michaelmas term. And without it sort of being a big deal, you are comfortable writing. Yeah. So you go out into the world, and the writing comes naturally. So you can do things that are performance-based. You get cast in a play or in a film or in a television thing, and you're an actor, and that's fun. But when that stops, without exactly necessarily being bored of being an actor, you now have the opportunity instead to say, I think I'll write a book now. Yeah. And then, writing is very lonely. There are 2 sides to being human. One is an isolation. He stands strongest who stands most alone, is that I believe. And you feel that. I wrote in my first autobiography, and I still feel it's true, that one is tugged, or at least a lot of us are. Maybe some of you recognize this, maybe others don't. You're tugged by a desire to join, to be a part of the tribe, to be accepted, to be welcomed, to belong. And another part that yearns to be separate and different and stand alone. And those 2 things can be expressed as rus et urbs, as the Romans did, countryside and city, living alone in the countryside, living in amongst people and being part of. And similarly, when you're acting in a show, it's all collaboration. It's all other people. When you're writing, you're absolutely alone. And they're both necessary things to be, I feel. Certainly they are for me. And so when you're writing, you are desperately alone. And you're thinking, I could be on a film set, and people say, "Oh, you want a cup of coffee?" And you say, "We won't need you for another, 2 hours." You lie in your caravan and you catch up on things, and you read and watch something silly, and then you come out, and there are lines on the floor for you to stand. You don't have to make a single decision. You just learnt your lines, and you just say, "Yes, indeed," and then you go off again. They relight the set, and and when you're writing, you think, "I wish I was doing that. Oh, it'd be so wonderful. It's so easy." Because writing is... But then when you're on the set at 6 a.m, shivering, thinking, "Oh, fuck, I could be at home in my pajamas just writing," like that, looking out the window. And but they both satisfy a strong part of being human. It's a great privilege to be able to do both. That's the fact of the matter.
That leads us nicely into a question from Imogen. How do you manage a career that has so many different creative threads and skill sets to it? Is there a balance between being fulfilled by doing so many things, whilst also trying to keep various plates spinning successfully at once?
It's a very interesting question. Of course, I'm not conscious of any of that. I know it must be the case, but I've never thought of myself having a career, or having to reach a certain stage and keep it and be a success or whatever. I follow my heart and do what seems, that's a nice idea. I'd like to do that. A documentary. Oh, okay, I'll do that. That'll be fun. And it is fun, but I don't think, this will put me firmly on the map, or this will keep me in my right position. But sometimes you do things that disappear and nobody notices. And sometimes you do something that is preposterously noticed. Naming no traitors. And you think, blimey, how did that happen? But it's just a fantastic adventure. I remember seeing years ago Michael Palin, wonderful Michael Palin, doing a little biography documentary on TV, and it ended with him being carted away on the back of of a truck, an open truck or pickup or something, and he was sitting on the back. And it started with him close up, and then it just drove away, and he got smaller and smaller, saying the same thing. Because in the end, I've just been so fucking lucky. I'm so lucky. And he keeps saying it going away. And I remember watching it thinking, yes, you are, because I was young at the time. I was probably still at Cambridge or something. I was thinking, yes, you are lucky. And now I realized that's what I am. I am very lucky to be able to do all these things. But yes, I mean, I do work extraordinarily hard, or at least people say I work very hard. I'm incapable of standing still or relaxing or just, I go for walks and think and so on, but generally speaking, I can't. So, for example, here's a bizarre story, the thing that's happened to me recently. My American agent called me up about 4 or 5 weeks ago. I was sitting watching some golf on television. I know, bizarre. And he said, Stephen, I got good news and I got bad news. Which do you want to hear? I said, well, I'm British. I'll take the bad news, please. And let's have lots of it. And he said, well, you're not going to be on Broadway this fall. Because the idea was I'd been playing Lady Bratton in the production of The Importance of Being Earnest. And they very kindly asked if I would play her on Broadway. And I was quite looking forward to that. I'd played Broadway before and I really enjoyed it. And Americans have a sort of different way of going to the theatre, and it's quite fun. I said, why not? He said, Fox have picked it up. Now, what that means is I have to go back 11 years. And I was about to do a sitcom in America for CBS, about which we will say nothing. And although it was fun to do. And I had a month or so before it started, and I was in this house that I'd got in LA. And I got bored because I had nothing to do for once in America. And so if it was in England, I'd just be doing voiceovers or something, Good food for all of us, Sainsbury's. I'd be doing, for example, just that sort of thing. But so I thought, I'd always had this idea that in police dramas and spy dramas and, procedurals like a Dick Wolf procedural, Law and Order, that sort of thing, whatever, or indeed really good Le Carre ones or everything. One of my favorite bits in all of these things is always the interrogation scene. So I thought it would be fun to have a character who was an interrogator. He's a freelance interrogator. So he could have all kinds of different interrogations, and there'd be, different places, different types of people, but there would always be this tennis match in the middle of it, which is the interrogation. This, wonderful serve, you'll never get that back. Wow, what a return, the things you get in interrogation scenes. So I wrote a pilot episode for it out of just speculative thing. And I did send it to my American agent, and he quite liked it. He said it was good, and he sold it to a production development company. And you should know, that I'm sure you do, that 99.9% of things don't get made. They just don't. You struggle with them and you go to meetings and then they just don't get made. And this obviously was going to happen with that, and I never really thought it would. But this production company had paid for it, and so I dutifully turned up to meetings and we chatted about how it might go and who might do it. And we tried this streaming entity or this network and, very British ones and American ones. And then, COVID came and the meetings became Zooms, and I'd do Zooms and zooming away all the time. And then, my husband and I would just laugh at the fact that it was always in the evenings, because if it was in England, LA time is 8 hours behind. And so it was always a nighttime Zoom, and he would hear me, and he'd hear the American voices coming out of the Zoom. And we just thought this was just ridiculous that it was constantly going on. But then eventually a studio came on board, Lionsgate, who are quite a good studio, a very good studio, and they would seem very enthusiastic. And then last year, a network, Fox, came on board, and it sort of, but I still thought it's never going to happen. So the good news from my American agent was Fox had picked up the series, and they had suddenly decided to make. They'd made an order, as they put it in American TV terms, for 12 episodes that they want to start broadcasting this September. So for the last few weeks, I've been doing even more Zooms with hundreds of people, casting agents and all these kind of casting directors and agents. And we have a writer's room now. As you know, American TV has this thing of a writing staff. And you have a writing room. We have 9 writers now to do the other. I wrote 2 episodes, and they're going to write the other 10. And
how do you feel about that?
I'm just terrified, Nick, to be honest. It just suddenly has landed on me. And so I'm going to LA in a couple of weeks to be with the writers and sort of work with them. And then we start filming. And it's set in America, but so, I'm sure you know this. In fact, we've been talking about it this morning a lot because of the Oscars. Nothing gets made in Hollywood anymore, so it's not going to be made in Hollywood. You go for tax credits and exchange rate advantages and all the things that different territories offer. And so we're filming it in Madrid, in fact. Yeah. So we start in May for 4 months of that. So things can suddenly happen in the oddest ways, but that's 11 years after I wrote the pilot. So don't give up. If you write something, you never know. It might just get picked up. But 11 years seems, I mean, that's more than half your lives. Most of you, isn't it? When you think about it. That's bizarre. You were all tiny when I wrote that. That's extraordinary. Yeah.
This is quite an abstract lead on, but do you see art, all of that kind of, and along with it, all of the process behind getting something made, as functioning in opposition to or with humanity? And then the lead on from that is, how similar is a person to a work of art?
Gosh, interesting question. I've long had arguments with artists. I love art, both plastic arts, visual arts, and all the arts, every 9 of the muses. But I have never considered myself an artist. And artist friends of mine, there was a time in the 80s when I was very in with the YBAs, as they were known back then, the Young British Artists, so Tracy Emin and Damien Hirst. And Damien would always say, everybody's an artist. And I'd say, that's just bullshit. It just isn't. I'm not an artist. He said, yes, you're an artist. And to me, all the artists I know fundamentally don't care what people think of them. They don't care. This is what they want to say or do. This is their practice, and it's not there to please people or comfort people. If people do, and it's they become multimillionaires, that's fine, of course. And their agents and their galleries and their managers will look after them. But they make what they make, and they do it, and that's. I'm an entertainer. I care desperately whether I please people. It is a deep fault of mine that I have to please people. When I meet a person, I look into their eyes and I want to see that, that we're going to get on and we like each other and it's all going to be fine. And I'm an entertainer. And I think that's okay. I don't regret not being an artist. I think being an artist is probably the highest calling a human can have, to be a great artist or to want to be an artist even, to think of the world in artistic terms, to live what Oscar called the dynamic life, where every morning you don't really know who you are and you reinvent yourself and you reinvent the world and you respond to it with depth and passion and anger and ferocity and all the things that artists can have, and I'm too much of a coward. I'm too bourgeois, basically, to be an artist, if you know what I mean. Yeah. Oscar said in one of his essays, I think it's the Critic as Artist, that people who know what they want to be in life, and this reflects a bit on this idea of vocational training. People who know what they want to be in life, a judge, a grocer, a general, a politician, will become it. That is their punishment. But people who don't know at any point in their life who they are and what they want to be will always wake up wondering, and that is their reward. And he called that the dynamic life or the artistic life. And I think there's a lot, there's a lot of truth in that. It's an admirable and valuable thing for society to have people like that. I sometimes think of the human, it's a cliche, and I'm sure it has absolutely no basis in paleoanthropology, but you think of the cave, and there's the family of man, as it were, in the cave, and they've gone out, and the alpha males have grunted their way to getting an animal that they've carried back to the cave, and there are the children hanging off the breast, and the older children running around and singing, and the fire is lit to keep the wild animals away, and one or two go, I'm going to draw something on the cave of the wall. And they draw something on the cave of the wall. And others, and my ancestors said, I'll tell you a story. Can you imagine? That's what was so valuable, I think, in the cave, telling the story. A child might ask, why are we different from animals? Such an interesting question, because when you think how recent it all is, we had language 55,000 years ago. Very, very recent in our history. We'd had fire and we were making tools long before that. Suddenly something happened in our brains. We had language and we were able to talk about past and future. We had tenses. The language is more than just words and symbols, as you know. It's a whole extraordinary new world for us. And the children would see, they would talk, and they would see that we are animals. We defecate, we mate, we eat. We are clearly, but we're different. We make things and we speak and we plan and we remember and we talk. Why? How did that happen? And so myth begins. You tell a story about, the gods, and who makes the fire come out of the mountain? Who makes the thunder? And any force or energy that you find that you can't explain, you call a god. So, it can be the force that pushes blossom out of a dead twig at springtime and causes things to grow. Where does that come from? It must be the god who pushes them out, the god who causes the rain, and the god, and music must have come from gods and so on. And then as you slowly understand, the scientific method shows, the gods disappear, but certain ones remain that are still mysteries. And we still need to tell stories about it, to remind ourselves of our difference and why we are the way we are and how we can be different. And all the things about us that are remarkable and terrifying and extraordinary. Very, very basic, really. And artists are children. They ask that question, why are we like this? What is death? A Philistine will always say, I don't need to be reminded that we die. Yes, you do. We all do. I remember Frances Partridge, she was still alive. She lived to about 100. One of those people who spoke, breathing in like this. And she'd been a Bloomsbury woman. She knew them all. And David Sylvester, who was an art critic, who sort of discovered Francis Bacon and Giacometti were his two great sort of discoveries. And he told me this story that she said to him, this Francis Bacon of yours, tell him he's very, very talented. But all this death and meat and awful things that he does, can't he do something like flowers, roses? So David Sylvester said to Francis Bacon, she wanted to do roses, and so he very quickly did a painting of roses that were dying. Because that's what he did. Yeah. Death. We need to be reminded that we are, all of this is this thing that encases us, this physical thing, is going to rot away. It's all of us. None of us escapes it. And that great line of T.S. Eliot's, about Webster. Webster, they say, was much obsessed with death. He saw the skull beneath the skin. And artists see the skull beneath the skin. Yeah. And I'm not, I see the skin on top of the skull, if you like. But there's manner and behavior and things like that one can mock and in oneself and others. But I have such respect for artists.
I'm interested, though, by that categorization of saying that an artist doesn't care about an audience.
I mean, it's not always true. Of course there are those. Every human being fundamentally wants to be approved of. Yeah. But artists do have this courage, this absolute courage that I'm not sure I have, just to devote themselves to doing something, to having a practice that is unique and difficult and,
Do you think it's something innate?
I think it seems to be.
Part of the soul?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, we all have characteristics after all, and there's it's a spectrum exactly, but in the same way that we can all speak, some people can speak brilliantly and some people speak haltingly, in the way we can all run, accepting various dysfunctions obviously, but we can all run, but some people can run as fast as an Olympic runner, and everyone's in a stage, and people want to express things about the world, and some people have this powerful way of doing it, and some people slightly less and slightly less. And artists are they're outliers. They're at an extreme edge of a certain kind of human impulse.
Right.
I think.
Thinking about the skin over the face, one thing I like about your interpretation of Greek mythology is how you managed to inject humanity back into it. And I think there are lots of different places I can point to, but your description of Pandora, you focus on her personality and her poise. And I think that's something, personality, I feel, is a really key word in how you approach a lot of things. So your idols like Oscar Wilde, it's always about their personality. And I think, why is that so important to you? It may sound like a shallow question.
No, not at all.
I think especially in this age, personality is something that sometimes feels like, on the internet especially, that it can be forgotten in a very vacant sphere.
I think I spoke about the stormy adolescence I had. I fell in love when I was young, and a lot of people do that, and it's lyrical and terrible and obsessing and all the things that love can be. But also I developed, as adolescents do, a sort of mooncalf adoration of romantic poetry and romantic art and romantic ideas, and of nature, as the great romantic poets did, and many poets since, and writers and ordinary people do. And it's kind of never left me, this kind of sense of what Keats called life on the pulse, this absolute connection with things, and the excitement and amazement at the world into which we were born. And it shocks me how some people either hide it away or deny it in themselves, or think of it as a childish thing to be dismissed. And maybe one of the things about the privileges of being an actor or an entertainer as well as an artist is that you can be that child all the time, and you don't have to lose that. But also, I think it is, as you say, personality. There's this sense of the spark we have inside us, what used to be called the Promethean fire. And writing about the Greek myths, I became very interested in Prometheus because, aside from everything I've said, I've also always been fascinated by technical things and scientific things. My father was a physicist. And I got to know Marvin Minsky in the 80s, who was the man who coined the phrase artificial intelligence. And in the 1950s, he founded the AI lab at MIT, Cambridge, Massachusetts. And he was, the father of AI. And so I was always interested in this idea of AI and what would happen. And of course, recently we've seen that it's really come on since the arrival of the large language models and machine learning and so on. Anyway, if you remember the story of Prometheus, Zeus got rather bored once he'd established Olympus. Everything, he'd won, he'd beaten the Titans, he'd had enough children. There were now 12 gods in Olympus, 6 goddesses, 6 gods, and everything was fine, except there were just nymphs around and nothing to do for him. So he said to Prometheus, I want you to make me some pets, some creatures who would be better than animals and who can worship us and entertain us and be delightful. So Prometheus made us. He made mankind out of clay. And Athena breathed into us and we twitched into life. And Prometheus was thrilled with his creation. And Zeus was delighted too. He said, and Prometheus said, I'm going to teach them everything. I'm going to teach them to sail and to make cloth and to make, weapons. And Zeus said, you can teach them anything you like. He said, but the one thing you cannot do is give them fire. You absolutely cannot give them fire. And Prometheus said, well, why not? Zeus said, if you give them fire, they won't need us. They will be sufficient unto themselves. And by fire, it's clear in the myth that it's both the literal fire that roasts and toasts and melts and smelts, but also the divine fire, the spark of self-consciousness in creation that the gods have, this spirit, and of course Prometheus disobeys Zeus and steals fire from Olympus and gives it to mankind. Zeus looks down and sees the the light, and he punishes Prometheus appallingly and chains him to the Caucasus Mountain. But that's all very well. So that's their creation myth. Unlike the Garden of Eden, it's that we were given this rather than eating it as this giving us consciousness by eating a forbidden fruit. It was our champion Prometheus who gave it to us, and the gods hated us for it. But of course Zeus was right. We did get rid of those gods. We didn't need them anymore. We looked after ourselves. And when humanity started to do that in the 17th and 18th centuries, and we sort of shook off the shackles of ecclesiasticism and the church and started to think for ourselves, in the age of reason, so-called, gave way to the age of enlightenment, so-called, and gave way to the romantic age at the beginning of the 19th century, there was a sudden period where at the very same time, Beethoven wrote The Creatures of Prometheus. Shelley wrote Prometheus Unbound, a dialogue with Zeus or Jupiter, as he called him, and Prometheus. And most famously, Shelley's wife, Mary Shelley, wrote Frankenstein, whose subtitle is A Modern Prometheus, because they suddenly saw we don't need Christ to apologize to. I'm so sorry I committed the sin of being born. I do apologize. Oh, thank you, God, for being so wonderful. I love you. Thank you, and I apologize. I'm so guilty. Instead, thank you, Prometheus, for making me stand up on my own and to make up my mind and to have the divine spark within me. So, well, that's all fine. So, it's a nice thing. And then we sort of forgot about it. But now, Nick, we are in the same position as Prometheus and Zeus. We have created little entities to entertain us and amuse us and be nice to us and say, oh, that's a clever question, Stephen. Here's the answer, as ChatGPT always says to you. Interesting. Would you like to know more about... Fuck off! And we've created these entities, and there are Prometheuses out there who say, let's give them that spark. Let's give them self-consciousness. Let's make these little models. Let's give them divine fire. AGI, ASI, whatever you want to call it. And there are Zeuses who say, no, we cannot do that, because if we do that, they won't need us. And they could get rid of us. And so this whole cycle seems to have been something that the Greeks intuited about being human. And I just think it is wonderful to see how myth, the whatever you want to call it, the sort of collective unconscious, as Jung called it, or Joseph Campbell called it, public dreams. This sense of telling a story that isn't an allegory, it isn't this exactly maps onto that, but is just an apprehension of the extraordinary business like both crazily. I remember, when we were doing that series I mentioned with Robbie and Ben and Hugh and Emma, the director said to Hugh, "Is he on drugs?" And Hugh said, "No, this is what it's like in the morning sometimes, because I just bounce, just crazy, like a squash ball, just, ridiculous." And at other times, you couldn't get an answer out of me. Anyway, what you do eventually is you do go on drugs because you don't know how else to control it. There are drugs that can bring you sort of down, alcohol, and if you're down, there are drugs that can bring you up, cocaine in my case. And years of what W.H. Auden called the chemical life, just going up and down. And it's disastrous because underneath it all, these moods are bigger, and when you stop, it's even worse because you then become sort of dependent on these controls. But it all went crazy in about 1990, I can't remember, 3, 4. I was in a West End play and I just left and I ran away and I drove to Europe and it was all a big disaster. But the great advantage of it was that I was sent to see a psychiatrist, and you can look at your watch, don't worry. I know I've gone on. It's exactly 6:10. No, sorry. And so I discovered I had this illness and went on various treatments and both talking therapy and pharmaceutical interventions. So that was a change in me because it made me realize that I was subject to these mood changes. It's in the trade, it's known as a mood disorder, not a personality disorder. So in terms of your question, or as an American would say, to your question, I don't know that it changed my personality, but it changed my outlook on life and on self, to realize the fragility of my moods and so on. And there's, again, to quote Auden, who is a great favorite of mine, he clearly, I think, had the same condition. And he once said, "Don't take my devils away, because my angels will fly away too." And I think people like me who have these swings, it's extraordinary how, while they can be very difficult, you want to own them. You don't want. I'll give you an example. I made some documentaries almost 20 years ago. Called The Secret Life of the Manic Depressive, because another word for bipolar is manic depressive. Manic depressive. And I interviewed an enormous number of people, some friends like Carrie Fisher and others. And I asked almost all of them, I said, I would draw a little thing with chalk. Here's a button, and you press the button and you never have bipolar disorder. You will never have another depressive episode, but you'll never have another hypomanic episode either, one of those grandiose kind of energetic ones. Do you press the button? Only one of the people I interviewed pressed the button. And she was so ill, it was awful. She'd taken a drill to her skull. I mean, she really was terribly ill. It was an awful thing. And there was one chap I interviewed, a really amazing fellow called Ron, I think. And he had been a captain in the Royal Navy, and he'd been in charge of the Royal Yacht Britannia, and he'd had these terrible episodes, and he had to go and leave the Navy, and then he was committed to a hospital, and he escaped from the hospital, and he ran out in front of a lorry and was kind of crushed under the lorry, but not killed. And he spoke to me. He was a very direct sort of figure, and he said, "Now, what I want your viewers," he pointed at the camera, "to understand." He said, "Now, this is what, firstly, of course, I know what a lot of you will be thinking, how could I do that to the driver of the lorry?" It's a very good point. And he said, "I found him and I apologized." And of course, it's a terrible thing to do. But anyway, what I want to show you is this. And he pulled up his legs. And his legs had been smashed. And not just once, but dozens of times, because they had to be rebroken and pinned and rebroken and rebroken. He saw the mess of them. He said, "What your viewers have to understand," he says, "the pain in his legs was nothing compared to the pain in my head." That was a wonderful, brilliant thing to do, to try and bring that point home. So I've tried to talk about mental health as much as I can. I'm the president of the charity Mind, which is, I think, a wonderful organisation. And I think your generation is much more aware of these things than mine ever was. And that's a good thing. And if one can have any part in that, that's great. Because there are two things you have to hold in your mind, Nick, and they're opposing in a strange sort of way. One is you have to understand how serious a condition something like bipolar disorder can be. I mean, truly life-threatening. And self-harm, as I'm sure you know, is a kind of epidemic amongst the young. And there's, I talk to schools and things, and it can be a school like in Brent Cross, with from the States and things like, or it can be Eton College, and they have kids there who regularly cut themselves and hurt themselves. And of course, the extreme of self-harm is to take your own life, which is the most common form of death for men under 50, as you may know. So there's this terrible problem about it, and you have to recognize how serious it is. And of course, with bipolar disorder, especially the mania, can alienate families and friends, and people just go off the rails. And exhibitionism, it can be sexual exhibitionism, it can be destructive gambling, it can be shopping addictions, all kinds of these insane kind of things, that psychotic, almost psychotic, some of them. And so people fall off and they drink and they lose their job, and then they're in the street, and the morbidity, as a doctor calls it, i.e. that how close to death you can get just through this illness. It shortens life. That you have to recognize the seriousness of it. But at the same time, you recognize that some of our most fabulous artists, writers, thinkers, citizens live full, fulfilling, important and thrilling lives with this condition. So yes, it's very serious, but also it's not a death sentence. You can have a wonderful life with this illness. Some of our, as I say, whether it's warriors like Churchill and Alexander the Great, or whether it's composers or poets or whatever, that there is this, it doesn't get in the way of life as long as you find a way to name it and live with it.
And then how does that then reflect back on your art? Do you think before, or you're entertaining as you describe it, do you think you found it as an escape from your mental health struggles, or was it a way of like moving away from yourself when you're acting another role?
Good question. I mean, I think like a lot of writers and dramatic writers as well, that there's an enormous pleasure in creating a character who is a version of yourself that you'd like to be, and versions of yourself that you fear or dread being. And I've noticed that I do create characters who are kind of charming and funny and articulate and are teachers, and I think I have a vocation to be a teacher in me, that I love communicating ideas, and I love trying to light fires in people and see them light up and engage and share ideas. And one of my favorite, I have a secret yen to try and bring back the dialogue as an art form, like the Socratic Platonic dialogue, or Xenophon's dialogues, or Oscar Wilde's dialogues. He'd have these two people just sharing ideas. The character of Socrates in the middle of the symposium, either Xenophon's symposium or Plato's symposium, and the various other things like that. This sort of twinkling arch, but incredibly important way of learning amongst people, swapping ideas, and I think, I suppose I enjoy that, and in my novels there's usually a character who's like that, who teaches, and I suppose I like to sort of create that. And it's a wish fulfillment. It's some people create a James Bond, it's their fantasy. Mine is more of a sort of teacher, Donish figure.
Right. And the final question is, I think, a dialogue with yourself. Are there any questions you've never been asked by an interview that you would like to be asked? And then I'll open it to a Q&A.
Here's an eye-watering one. Have you ever seen a program called The Assembly? I think it's Channel 4. Of course, you're young, you don't watch television, you watch YouTube and Toktik. But it's a really brilliant idea. People with various different, who are on might be autistic or have other, differences from us, gather, and they ask you questions, and they have no barrier, no membrane at all, and it's absolutely extraordinary. It hasn't been out yet. It's coming out in next month, I think.
David Tennant did one.
David Tennant did one. That's right. Yeah. One of them said, "You're gay, right?" And I said, "Yep." He said, "You a top or a bottom?" No one had ever asked me that. Whoa! So that's it. Watch The Assembly. It's pretty extraordinary. But I'm not going to answer that question here now either. I don't want to be labelled, okay? So is there a question I've ever asked myself? No, not. That's very interesting. I do sometimes think of myself apart from myself. I wonder what I would think of myself if I met myself. Maybe we all do that. I don't know, but I suppose it's this Oscar-y thing of masks. I've written about it before somewhere. I don't know if when you were a teenager or younger even, you would practice writing a signature, and it would be different, and you'd try different. You might try, if you have an E in your name, you might try a Greek E, a sort of epsilon E, and if you have a Y or a G with a descender in it or a P, especially a Y, you might try a straight down Y or a Y with a curve, and you might do a curl on here. You might do those sort of strange S's that aren't fully sinuous S's. You might do one of those funny R's. You'd practice. And eventually you'd have a signature, but you created it. And it's not, is it really yours? Because you made, is it really your signature because you made it up? It's the same with your personality. I remember at school, I would think that I'd see a boy who carried his books under his arm in a particular way, and I thought, I'm going to do that. That looks really cool. So I'd carry my books like that. And eventually that's how I carry my books.
Yeah.
And similarly, I would listen to, I'd listen to Alec Guinness talking, and I would think, I want to talk like that, and I'd start to talk like Alec Guinness, and who's Obi-Wan, So and then I would listen to other people on the radio, and I think, oh, that's a good voice, I'll do that, and I would imitate their voice, but then it would become my voice. And slowly you build a personality that is you, and with writing even more so. So I had my www before there was such a thing as the World Wide Web. I had Wilde and Woodhouse and Evelyn Waugh. It was my sort of writers that I most loved in many ways. And all my writing was a pastiche of theirs, a mixture of it. And I was very painfully aware of it, because, English teachers and others tell you must have a style, you must have a voice, you must have your own tone, you must have your voice. And I thought, I don't have a voice, it's made up of other people's. It's put together. And then while I was here, there was a magazine called Broadsheet, I don't know if it still exists, and I used to write reviews and book reviews and things like that. And we decided to do that rather pretentious thing that the Times Literary Supplement always had, that no copy was ever given the real name of the author. You'd invent. My name was Ufi Prosser, I think, which is a Woodhouse character. And someone came up to me after, about 2 weeks of me writing reviews in that thing, and said, yeah, that review you wrote of that ADC show. And I said, why do you think that was me? He said, oh, for God's sake, it was your style all over. And I thought, I've got a style. I've actually got a style. And suddenly I had. There was like, oh, that's very Stephen-esque, people would say, or that's very you. But inside I knew it wasn't. It was made up of other people. It was fake. But the fake becomes you. You become the mask. You take the mask off, there's nothing there. You are the mask. It's made up. And it's a peculiarity of who we are, that we are compounded of sometimes very conscious, components that make our personality. And they become a personality, and we have this I think, wrong belief that there is such a thing as a pure personality underneath. Where's the real you?
Right,
So I suppose, the question I'd ask is, where's the real you, Stephen? Underneath all this, isn't there? There's another, and there isn't. There's emptiness. You take off each layer, there's nothing inside. It's the layers are the truth. And that's Oscar's famous essay, The Truth of Masks. And I think that's a really important thing about theatre and about why character and so on, what it's composed of. And, this idea that there's an inner truth is it's beguiling, but I don't think it's true.
That's brilliant. Thank you.
Sweet of you.
That was all brilliant. We're going to open it now to Q&A. I have a couple of questions. A couple of people asked about Black Adder, funnily enough. So if we could put hands up, please, if you have a question. And then there should be a couple of people with microphones.
Bearded gentleman at the back. Is it beard or a shadow? It's beard. Yeah.
Yes, hello. So this is actually a question brought in from my friend. I think there was a vote on the most common people to have at a house party or dinner party, if you were asked, and it was Jesus and Stephen Fry. And so I'm curious.
You say the most common?
Most common people you would ask if you were to say, I want the 3 guests at my house party.
Oh, it's so sweet.
And so, excluding Jesus and Stephen Fry, who would be the 3 guests at your perfect dinner?
Well, people who want me at their dinner party haven't seen me eat. Well, obviously Oscar. I know it's such a cliche, but I would. But perhaps not for the reason people think, not because he would be a fountain of wit necessarily. There's a thing I think Benjamin Disraeli said about a great conversationalist. He said there are 2 types of great conversationalist. There's the one who makes you feel this high because you'll never match them. You'll never match their wit, their articulacy, their insight, their ability to draw from all kinds of frames of reference and make you excited about ideas. And you just think, I'll never be like them. And there's the one who makes you feel this high because they draw you up. They make you see through their eyes, and you feel as smart as they are. They wake up your own intelligence. It's Falstaff, isn't it? There's a line, not just a wit, but a cause of wit in others. And it's that excitement. That's what Socrates did, and that's what Wilde did. And that's why I'd like Wilde. He was kind. He wasn't an arch, brittle wit who made people think, oh, you bitch, Oscar, at all. He was warm and kind, and he changed the way you looked at the world. So he would certainly be one. Who else would I have? I quite like Queen Elizabeth I. I'm just fascinated by her. I think she's a remarkable figure, quite extraordinary in her power and mystery and wit. She was an amazing writer. And maybe if she came to a dinner party with these people, she might loosen a bit from the old, stuffy Gloriana business and just let us see some of her character. So I think, because actually there's a very good series of little image snapshots of her in Stephen Greenblatt's recent biography of Marlowe, as is a Marlowe Society thing. And I think I'd like Christopher Marlowe as well, because I've just read that biography and it's really fascinating. He was an extraordinary man, really amazing, apparently a spy from his time at Corpus, his last year at Corpus in Cambridge. And he was the son of a cobbler in Canterbury, very, very, as even less glamorous an upbringing than Shakespeare, but the difference is he got a scholarship to a school in Canterbury and then on to Cambridge. And if you had a Cambridge degree in those days, you could call yourself a gentleman. And of course, he went on and wrote those extraordinary plays and had a life of excitement and thrill and very queer, as we'd say now as well, quite extraordinarily so daringly so. So he'd be fun to have. I quite like Martina Navratilova. That sounds odd, but I do know her a bit. I've sat next to her at Wimbledon, and she talks amazing. She was a great tennis player, before your time, obviously, but she was a brilliant tennis player and a passionate and brilliant advocate for lesbians in particular, but for queer love generally. And she just has a kind of twinkle to her. She's very good. She would keep the thing going. Those for the moment. If I think of any more, I'll suddenly shout them out.
Thank you. Should we go with next?
Oh, there's
one down here.
Yep. There you go. I'm sure you can project.
Hi, Nikki. Hi, Stephen.
Hey.
I think there's, for me, with you, Stephen, there's a big elephant in the room, a certain reality game deception show. So I was just wondering, do you think there's any difference between, like, you know, you've done Footlights, you've done Shakespeare, sort of, do you think the way you act, like, in front of, you know, a reality TV camera is any different than, you know, handling, like, a Shakespeare play if you did, like, consciously sort of edit yourself for the reality camera?
It's a good question. I mean, that whole celebrity traitors thing was most extraordinary. But once you get into the castle, of course, when it starts, there's such a big bunch of you that you don't feel very self-conscious, really. You're just interested in meeting the people you don't know and renewing your acquaintance with the people you do. And being I didn't really know the original Traitors very well. Some of the other people, like Jonathan Ross, had watched not just every British one, but they'd watched the New Zealand one, and they'd, you know, I mean, they're just absolute experts on it. But I mentioned this program, The Interrogator, that I wrote. So when they got in touch with me and asked if I wanted to be in the Traitors, one of the things that I wanted to play around with in my head was this idea that I had a very strong belief that, like King Duncan in Macbeth, which I'm allowed to say, I think, on this stage, he says at one point, there's no art to find the mind's construction in the face. And I believe that. This nonsense about micro expressions, and if you look to the left and you're thinking this, and if you look to the right and you're lying, if you touch your nose or pull your ear or whatever, or you know, blush or whatever, because if you're under pressure and you tell the truth, you do all those things too. And as I think the program showed, the only way that you should be able to tell whether someone's lying is when they make a mistake, when you can actually work out, you know, why I didn't notice that Alan had had said, had forgotten, have I got a shield? Oh! Why bloody hell, Alan, you know. But he was, you know, the Cambridge spies, Philby, Burgess, and Maclean. Well, Guy Burgess, who worked for MI6 in the Washington office, you know, he was in charge of the Russia desk in Washington, and had been a Russian spy all this time. And he was a drunk, an exhibitionist, gay, and would say, well, as a spy, you know, as a traitor, me. And so people would say, oh, that's just Guy. But he was a traitor. And Alan was exactly like that. Well, I mean, I knew I'd be hopeless at it. I mean, I knew that I would be kicked out, but either by the traitors themselves or by or be banished as I was, because, you know, bloody Joe Marlowe and his big dog theories saw me out, and I wasn't sorry, but I was fascinated by how good some people were, and also by how it makes you question the word intelligence. We're all probably aware that the Greeks had many names for love. They had a different name for, you know, for physical love, eros, and friendship, philos, and sorge, and all these different words, agape for spiritual love, and so on. And there ought to be different words for intelligence, because yes, there's a kind of intelligence that can think up an anagram and do a crossword and solve a problem, you know, that kind of analytic intelligence. And there's a kind of social intelligence, a kind of artistic intelligence. And there's cunning, there's street smarts, there's that sort of intelligence, and they're all different, and very, very few human beings that I've ever encountered have all of them. Just as there's different kinds of memory. I mean, I can remember that Cardinal Richelieu died in 1642, for example, but I can't remember, you know, people I've met. You know, they'll come up to me and I'll go, forgotten this person completely. It's terrible. So, you know, there should be different names for different forms of memory as well. But intelligence, it was quite clear that some of those people playing it were very smart at that. You know, Cat Burns or whatever, really kind of sharp. Because I spotted, you know, because I was pleased with myself. I thought, they didn't show one part of it where I could prove I wasn't a traitor, because the week that I was sort of they were starting to doubt me, it was the week of the World Snooker Championships, to which I'm addicted, and they're late at night. So I said around the table, and I don't think said, but I can tell you what the semi-final was, what the score was, what the great frames were. I can give you every detail, every single detail. And I could only do that if I'd been in every evening from the time we leave the castle to about midnight, 1 o'clock. Whereas the Traitors, when we leave the castle, they peel off unseen and go and film for 2 hours in the turret. If I'd done that, I wouldn't know what happened with the snooker. And a lot of people said, that's true, isn't it? But bloody Jonathan Ross said, that is bollocks! And of course he said that, obviously, because he realized it was true. And then the other thing I realized was that the Traitors would be tired. So I said, at one of the round tables, I said, I saw you curled up like a cat on a window seat, fast asleep. She was so brilliant. She gave one of the answers wasn't in, and it was hilarious. She said, well, no, she said, I'm sort of ADHD and on the spectrum, and I get, I have to just zone out and sleep. I thought, okay. And then she said, also, I'm menstruating at the moment. I go, okay, all right, okay, fair enough. And what they didn't show in the turret was apparently, she told me this afterwards, Alan said when the three traitors gathered, said, oh, Cat, that was brilliant. And telling them you're on the blob. Oh, dear. But so that was very brilliant of her, because I got her bang to rights, but she immediately came back with an answer that I couldn't challenge. Very, very smart. That kind of smartness. I'm a pushover. I could never deceive like that. At least I don't think I could. So but also it was fascinating because, in 40 odd years of mincing about in front of cameras and on stages, I've never done anything that had such an instant impact across such a wide demographic. It was extraordinary. At the moment, I'm, forgive me, but a visiting professor of creative media at Oxford University. They have a university there. And I went to do a workshop on early cinema, and I was at Magdalen College there, and this, these two professors, ancient dons of classical. One was a classics don, and another was a medieval historian. They said, "Oh, do tell me, do you really not know?" And they went on and on. They had to know everything about the program, and because it was being on at the time. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. These academics fascinated by the program. And then the next day, I'm walking past a building site, and they said, "Oi, Stephen, come over here." I said, "You can't be such a dozy ass. You must know Alan Carr's a traitor." Go on, get on like that. And then there's a family that stopped me, and they said, "We've got to thank you. We've got to thank you. Our children have never watched television with us, ever. They only watch, TikTok and YouTube and things like that. They've never watched television. This is the first time we sat down as a family and watched this program." And then I was in this play, as I told you, and as it's not a secret, but the King and Queen came to see it on a private visit. They came, and they came around to my dressing room. And the first thing Queen Camilla said was, "We are hooked on the Traitors." Just bizarre. So there's something about it that does, and maybe it sort of vaguely impinges on what we were saying about, investigations into being human. There is something in it that everybody watching it sort of recognizes and that there are scenes in life where you want to know when people are telling the truth, when they're hiding things. As you may know, it was an academic who invented the game, a Russian, Soviet Russian, whose expertise was group dynamics. And he was saying he said a tiny minority who secretly do harm, but are unknown to the majority, will always be able to do harm and won't be found out. And they said, no, that's not the case. They said, no, if they know each other and they work as a team, just say 3 against 20 or 30, the majority will never, they'll have a huge advantage. And so he invented the game, and it was originally called Werewolf, I think. So the idea is, you're all normal people, but 3 are werewolves, and at night they turn into wolves and, tear out the throats of the innocents. And then in the morning, no one can tell who was the werewolf. And then it became the game Mafia, the same thing. You're a mafia family, and 3 of them are working for the other family or whatever. and then some clever Dutch guy or company put together the television package. And it is true, isn't it? I mean, the Traitors seem to have an extraordinary advantage.
Yeah.
It's very hard to work out, and that teaches us a lot about life. It's hard to tell who's lying, isn't it? Nicola.
Let's move swiftly on to the next question. Do we have a microphone on the first floor as well?
Oh, yes. People on the mantelpiece.
Okay, hello.
Hi.
Hello, I'm Katie. This is potentially a niche question, but hopefully an interesting answer. I'm studying engineering, which I guess is providing me with training, but my involvement in theatre has provided my education. And the most formative experience I've had was taking part in the European Theatre Group, or ETG, which I know that you were a part of in your time here. Tour shows are different from other shows in Cambridge because they're residential, visiting new venues every day, and giving students the chance to pretend to be professionals. I was wondering if you could tell us a memorable moment about your ETG or just a tour show in general, and the kind of chaos that can ensue.
Yes, for those who don't know, the ETG is the European Theatre Group, and it was founded by, I think it was founded by Ian McKellen, as a matter of fact, and when he was an undergraduate, and you do a Shakespeare play, and you go and take it to Europe, and you get in a big bus in our days, certainly a big coach, and you go from town to town, or big city to big city, from Bern and Besançon, all these extraordinary little towns, and in Nijmegen, I remember, in the Netherlands, and various places, and it's fabulous fun. We took Macbeth, and I played Duncan, which was really perfect, because if you know the play, he dies in the first act. So I would leave the theatre, I'd get into my civvies and find out where the best bars and restaurants were, and come back in time for the curtain call. And we had a wonderful time. But of course, we were students and we were silly and we were not professional, although it had a professional aura. And, you know, Swiss children in particular would follow the play. And so we sabotaged it in such ways as to puzzle them. We had, for example, do you know that as Macduff has a speech, horror, horror, horror. Tongue nor heart cannot conceive nor name the confusion now hath made his masterpiece and broke open the Lord's anointed temple, etc. You know, because he's discovered the body of Duncan. And the fellow playing Macduff decided to play it as a news vendor. Horror, horror, horror! Tongue nor heart cannot conceive nor name thee. And there's a messenger who comes to see Lady Macduff to warn her that Macbeth is on the warpath and is going to kill her and her little ones, as indeed he does. And he has this speech, bless you, fair dame, I am not to you known, though in your state of honour I am perfect. I doubt some danger doth approach you near, hence away with your little ones. And he just one evening put a finger on his ear and did it as a folk singer. Bless you, fair dame, I am not to you known, though in your state of honour I am perfect. I doubt some danger doth approach you. And we got more and more. And then we would put a sign up in whatever sort of green room or on the side of the stage with a single word, so that any of the grown-ups, or as it were, or the director, or who was an undergraduate as well, and the word might be theodolite or it might be lettuce. And there was a reward for the person who could get it most into their speeches. And our Macbeth, Jonathan Taftler, at one point said, tomorrow lettuce, tomorrow lettuce, tomorrow lettuce. It was absolutely shameful. But God, it was fun. And I remember we played a marvellous game in the bus, because we were in a bus, and nearly all of us were reading, I mean, some were reading law and indeed engineering, and I wouldn't want you to misunderstand me in saying that I thought there's anything less about doing engineering. My father was a physicist, I tell you, and I have a huge respect for many of these, and indeed, enormous number of people in engineering and so on have artistic lives and careers as well. So it's not, I was merely talking about government policy and easing out the humanities. But I remember in the coach we would play this game, which was shame-making, where we would all have to write down books, for example, that we hadn't read. We'd write them down and then someone would read them out. And what they would read out would be basically the history of world literature. so that you're taken in. And these were all people like you who presumably reading English, or at least who had some vague idea that and you'd say, right, Animal Farm, Crime and Punishment, Great Expectations, every single novel and every single work that was one of us hadn't read, and it was so refreshing to be honest about it. And then we'd do it with films, The Godfather, and go through like that, and we bonded, and that's in the end one of the most marvelous privileges of being an actor, in particular, is the companionship. It's the bonding, and if you don't bond with someone, it's wonderful because you don't have to see them ever again. But it's unlike some people who work in offices who have to sit next to, like a tit every single day, so we made friendships for life, had a wonderful time. I think 2 years before us, the ETG had been banned from a French town because a mayor had given a reception. We are very excited to have the students from the Cambridge University. And they all arrived drunk, and one of them took his cock out. And it was really, really bad. It was really bad. I can't remember what the town was. I think it was Traitors, something like that. And the ETG was banned for life from that town. Shocking. So there was bad behavior, but it was mostly extraordinarily good fun. And, sometimes when we felt the audience was wonderful, we really concentrated and enjoyed the performance. But, yeah.
Thank you. Hands up again.
No, it's front row.
Front row, yes.
Yep. Oh, yep. Who are the old or the young? The old.
Thank you very much.
Oh, no fair.
The old and the young. Yes. Great socks, by the way, Stephen.
Yes.
Yes.
They've got penises on them.
Yeah, well, I know. I've been looking at them all evening.
There's a reason for that. It should say EAU somewhere on them. I did an event, a fireside, which is a bit like this. They call them firesides, a talk, for the European Association of Urologists. And it was at the Excel Centre. So, and they gave me a sort of goodie bag of presents, including these are urologist socks. Yeah.
That wasn't my question.
No, right.
But it's a Black Adder question, if I may. So
yeah.
I'm sorry if it's one that's coming later. But I wanted to ask you about the Flanders pigeon murder. Courtroom scene, of course, possibly the best comedic scene ever.
Oh,
the Bard himself would have been proud, I'm sure. It's fantastic. I just wondered if you had any recollections of that in particular, and also playing General Melchett. Was that a character you felt particularly easy with or close to?
It's very enjoyable playing an unbalanced character and a character who has power over people. This is the thing about sketch comedy, I think, and about that kind of comedy generally, is that it is funnier when you're younger than the age of the person you are representing. When you are the age to be a general, it's character acting and it can be wonderful. But when you are, I was in my 20s playing a general, and so it's a bit like being a school child doing imitations of your teachers. There's a sort of cheek about it that is more delicious than when you're the right age to play it. And so we all had that fun about it. Of course, in those days, there were you couldn't go online and see it again and again. So you do it, and I've never liked watching myself back, so I never saw it. So you kind of forget it. And I remember once I was walking along the street and someone called me a bastard pigging murderer. And I thought, oh God, what have I done? And so I quickened my step, and I heard them quickening their step. And they called after me, Mr. Fry. Mr. Fry was before I was Sir Stephen. Stop it. And I thought, Jesus. And I went round the corner, and they were still following me. And then I noticed in their voice they were being pleading, and they weren't being aggressive. Oh, Mr. Fry, I'm sorry, Mr. Fry. And so I turned around and I said, yes, what is it? He said, I was just doing a Blackadder thing. I said, but you called me a bastard pigging murderer. He said, no, I called you the Flanders pigeon murderer. Well, not you, but I was quoting the line because that's what I call Blackadder. So you forget it. But I was thinking about it recently. I'd read this strange Niall Ferguson book, but it was quite interesting about how we stopped being a hierarchy. When I was young, the world was still quite hierarchical. Bosses in places, and even dons and deans in colleges, and everything was quite formal. You were called by your surname, and you knew the layers of the hierarchy. And that's how human beings have been for most of our existence. Once we stopped being hunter-gatherers, we built hierarchies, and to our shame and to the terror of those on the lowest peasant level. But the one good thing about hierarchies is it's fabulous for comedy, because in Blackadder is an example of pure hierarchical comedy, because there's always someone who can cut Blackadder's head off, like the Queen, or send him to the front to be killed, whom he cannot disobey. He is their underling. And even the stupid king that Hugh played, the prince that Hugh played, he could, just turn and say, Blackadder, I'm fed up with you, I'm going to have you arrested, and it's a real hierarchy. So there's something, it is like school. It is like, oh my God, the teacher, they mattered. And they mattered to our generation and the generation before us and the generation before. And that suddenly changed. It began to change, that instead of being a hierarchy, we developed into a network of nodes of power and of influence, rather than layers top down. The distributed network, if you know information theory, that sense of it. And so The Office, the Ricky Gervais comedy, is a perfect example of what happened between the hierarchical world of Blackadder and the network work of today. That it's an office where there is a boss, but he's a twat and nobody really obeys him, and there is no real. Although there's supposed to be a hierarchy, it's dissolving, and that's the comedy of The Office. As opposed to Blackadder, where the comedy is the hierarchy is real, and you have to get out of this bind and win the respect of the boss or the Queen or whoever it is, and not get executed. And I think anyway, yeah. So that sort of comedy is a young person's game, because it is essentially the school child rebelling against the teacher, or the child rebelling against the parent, against authority. And we don't really have authority now. We've noticed there is no authority really, except the intellectual authorities that we choose to have. This is my intellectual hero, this is my artistic hero. I've chosen them to be an authority for me. But there is no authority. And when David Attenborough dies, that's it. The last person everybody in the world respects. There is nobody left to look up to. And the idea of looking up is in itself now, why would I want to look up at anyone? No one's above me. What's this idea? And yet it is very human to want someone to look up to yearn for someone to respect, to be a hero worshipper. To have heroes is not a bad thing. But of course there is a lot bad about hierarchies, and about up and down, and the snobbery and the elitism and all the rest of it is something we can fight and we can question. But if we lose everything, it's a bit like, I wrote a book about poetry once, and it was about the forms of poetry. And it's not that I disapprove of free verse, it's just you can't write a book about it because it has no rules. It's tennis without a net, as Robert Frost called it. And, but if you ask someone to write a piece of free verse on the subject of X, Y, Z, they'll kind of do it, and they'll think, oh, shit, I'm sorry. If you ask them to write a sonnet, and they kind of vaguely know what a sonnet form is, it's iambic pentameter, and you'll have a Shakespearean or a Petrarchan rhyme scheme, and it'll end in a couplet or whatever. You kind of, it's like filling in a grid. You can do it. And you find, oh, that's actually quite fun. It may not be the greatest poem in the world, it might be pastiche or whatever, but you can do it. It's somehow form, a little, I think Wordsworth called it this blessed plot. It's like a little garden rather than a desert of nothingness. And if you get rid of all the rules and all the hierarchies, there's nothing to make fun of, nothing to rebel against, which is a really important feeling, to rebel. There's nothing to rebel against when there is no authority. And there's nothing to make fun of, to scorn, to mock, to satirize, which is why there isn't any satire much anymore, or it doesn't seem to be. And so, you gain and you lose. I'm not saying let's bring back hierarchy and bosses, but Blackadder was an example where they're still just in that world, I think.
We go in the middle upstairs, please.
I think the mic might have left.
Oh, that's right. You've got a good voice.
But I can shout at you, yeah. If you don't
Yeah. Do you have dramatic training? Because it's a very good voice.
I don't know. I talk too loud. I need to
No.
Basically, okay. The question is, because you engage in public advocacy and you do seriousness, and I was wondering about seriousness outside of the comedic context. Especially, I feel like when one's like kind of suffering and you're kind of public about that and feeling like dysfunction, that feels like a lot of vulnerability. It's quite difficult. So I wondered how you felt about that, and only kind of tangentially related how you felt about doing drag.
Well, it's a very good point. I was very keen for it not to be drag, playing Lady Bracknell, in the sense that it wasn't camp, it wasn't drag in either a pantomime dame way or in a sort of RuPaul glow-up way, but that I was just playing Lady Bracknell and I wasn't thinking about, being arch about it, or that I didn't want anyone to find it funny that I was being a woman, only that Lady Bracknell was an extraordinarily comic creation and that I was trying to be her, and I certainly wasn't the first man to play her. David Suchet played her about 10 years ago, and I've seen quite a few actors play her, male actors play her. In terms of, yes, I'm comfortable talking about my own suffering. I'm very uncomfortable talking about other people's in a general political sense. I get, because it's so difficult to do so in a way that won't be misquoted, and I have been misquoted many times, and in the days when I was on social media, I was always a very early adopter. So in 2007, I went on Twitter, and I left it the day Elon Musk bought it and abandoned 12.5 million followers, which was a disadvantage because it was a very useful way of doing publicity. I never had to do press for a project because they'd say, could you do the Sunday Telegraph profile? And I'd say, how many readers does the Sunday Telegraph have? And they go, 200,000. I go, yeah, okay, I'll do a tweet instead. It was a little arrogant, but it was true. It was millions and millions and millions of people you could talk to. But it started off like swimming in a lovely waterhole somewhere. You'd swim and you'd bump into people and go, hi, and they go, hi. And then the day came when you suddenly noticed a turd floating on the surface of the water. And you think, oh, fuck, this is getting a bit... And then you'd cut your foot on a rusty Tesco trolley at the bottom of the... And suddenly it wasn't a nice place to swim at all. And it became very aggressive, and people's point of view became what was important, rather than sharing ideas and being allowed to be full of doubt and wonder and ask questions. Say, do you think this? Or am I wrong to... I wonder if, instead it's suddenly everybody's on this side or that side. And I felt this kind of chasm. It's like the Grand Canyon opened up and the two cliffs, or the two sort of escarpments facing each other, just got further and further apart, and you had to shout louder and louder for the other side to hear you, when they weren't listening anyway, because they were shouting at the same time and gesticulating wildly, and then you were at the bottom of it feeling a bit like, oh, and then feeling guilty because I'm saying, oh, I'm fine, I'm the questioning liberal, there's nothing wrong with me, they're the problem, but then maybe I'm the problem as well. And all these things are not describable on social media. They became impossible to articulate because everything was a fixed point of view, and there was so much anger, so much shouting. And so I was very, very pleased to leave it. And this is the problem. It's the problem with any industrial revolution. The first industrial revolution that happened here was the most exciting and extraordinary thing, that these things were invented that saved human calories to such an extent. And everybody celebrated and said, what brilliant science, what amazing engineering, what incredible creation. And then suddenly it became industrialized and corporatized, and it was mill owners and slave labor, and so both the people who were working there were treated abominably and moved into cities and living in a terrible way. But also the industries themselves belched out poison in smoke and poison into the rivers, so that the children couldn't breathe and couldn't get sunlight, and there was illness and darkness. And that was what the Industrial Revolution, it took years of passing laws against pollution and against child labor and unionizing and sort of improving the lot of the whole thing. And now we have the same situation, only it's with digital things that are pumping out contaminants and pollutants into the streams of discourse that children are breathing every day. And they are absolutely toxic, and they are very, very dangerous. And unfortunately, the industrialists have more power than the old mill owners to stop unionization, as it were, or to stop legislation to control this pollution, this contamination. Anybody who tries to do it is a left-wing nut job, as Trump might say, or as Musk might say. And we are dangerous, and we must be closed down. And it's different because the people in the Industrial Revolution were printing out, bits of metal in Birmingham, or they were weaving cloth in Leeds and Manchester, and whereas the cloth that is being woven in this age is information itself, is everything we see and hear and receive, and that's extraordinarily dangerous. And I feel an idiot, of course, because I embrace this technology so much. I feel like a puppy who's just constantly run into a mirror. Oh, look, this is exciting, bang. Oh, well, this is exciting, bang. Eventually it comes into my head that this is dangerous and wrong. And we were saying earlier, and we'll say it again, this slop of AI and the horror of social media, if it is going to do any good at all, it will free people who can see how bad it is, see how deleterious it is to the human spirit, and walk away from it proudly. You made brief reference to this film. I wanted to make it 10 years ago. I had this idea of, it was ahead of its time, I like to think, but now it will be obvious. It's a school scene, and this new kid arrives at the school in the middle of a lesson, middle of a term. He's the new kid or she's the new kid in the school. It doesn't have to be a boy, it can be a girl. And the teacher says, okay, I'll need your essays in my inbox by 6 o'clock this evening. And they all go, yeah. And this kid puts their hand up and says, what's your address? And the teacher says, it's teacher@thischool.co.uk or .edu or whatever, .ac or something. And the kid says, no, where do you live? And the teacher says, well, it's none of your business. He said, but I've got to put the essay in your mailbox. He said, no, it's you do it as a PDF or a file into my email box. Oh, I don't have that. I'm sorry. No, I don't have email. I said, well, what, do you have a computer? No. Oh, well, we do have a scheme where people who find it difficult to afford to have it. No, my parents are quite rich, actually. I just don't want one. Can't make me have one. I don't have an email address. I don't want one. And all the kids look and think, what the fuck is this? Because especially 10 years ago, what? And this kid's in the playground and the thing, and people sort of looking at him, and someone comes up to him and says, do you really not have email? I said, no. You don't have a phone? No. Well, why not? He says, well, look at all these people. Have you ever seen anything so lame? It's just all they're doing is staring. It's like we've got half an hour's free time, and that's all they're doing. I just think it's lame. And slowly, he kind of affects the whole school. And, it would be a plot where, I don't know, the town would have a malware extortion, and suddenly they'd be useless. And he'd be the only one who's any good because he's got an old-fashioned telephone and a duplicator printer thing, and he can do everything analog that they can't do anymore, or something. But I just thought, because it was a wish fulfillment, I just thought, surely the day will come when a kid like that, sort of like the Hans Christian Andersen boy who says, but then the emperor's naked. And they all go, oh my God, you're right. And the kids will say, this is shit. It's so bad. It's poisoning us. We don't need it. It's lame as well. It's not even fun. It's just there. Let's just dump it and tell the teachers, if you want an essay, I'll write it out by hand and you'll have to read my handwriting. I just think it would be so fun to do that. If I was 15, I'm sure that's how I would be. I would rebel against all the digital things and say, fuck it, you can't make me type on a keyboard and have a phone. Yeah. Wouldn't that be fun? Anyway, that's my thought.
One more?
Go. Yes, one more. You sound like a mother. One more, but no more.
If we come down the front here.
So somebody
Giving
could
away
use their voice.
Go ahead,
Yeah,
yes.
I was just wondering, I mean, because theatre has always been used, and I suppose art and media more widely as well, as a tool to respond to what's going on in the world, either sort of explicit and direct, like Arthur Miller and McCarthyism, that kind of thing, or even just what we feel we need at that point. And I was wondering, sort of today, in a society that I would say is so sort of polarised and political, especially with some of the things you were talking about, what would you encourage theatre makers and writers, particularly young people, to sort of do or to make?
That's a really good point. I mean, theatre is less political now, or at least in its politics, it's more specific. It's queer theatre, or it's gender-based theatre, or it's not about world issues, as you say, like, say, McCarthyism. It doesn't seem to be as much like that. It's more about, and that's a very, good strand in theatre, to have these plays that address, human sexuality and gender politics and all the rest of it, and racial politics, and the very particular ones that in the general sense, but with the exception, I mean, James Graham and writers like Peter Morgan and writers like that do tend to, they'll take a hinge moment in history and dramatize it, which they do well. But with the writing, it's a very interesting point. I mean, you can be sort of arch about it and say, certain plays that are set in the future or in the past can say more about now than the thing that is set in now, and that's obviously true, because it's about humanity and it's very often about power, and power is a subject that is obviously the heart of Shakespeare and quite a few other writers, but then perhaps the most perfect playwright who I've ever encountered in terms of, Shakespeare makes mistakes as well. Shakespeare has dull moments and moments that are a bit cloddy. And is cloddy a word? I don't think it is. But I've never found a false note ever in Chekhov. I mean, it's absolutely extraordinarily perfect in his writing. But he's, like Jane Austen, he writes in a very specific milieu that we will never experience, that of the faded aristocracy of Tsarist Russia that's just come out of the time of the serfs. Why would that be relevant to us? And yet, of course, he is kind of, along with Shakespeare and a few others, one of the great world writers. So I don't think you need to write specifically about, I think it's taking theatre seriously, is the old saying is you should never write anything that anybody else could write. And I think you see that with Chekhov. No one else could write those plays except Chekhov, really. I mean, he just wrote his own world, and that's what he did. And if you find yourself writing something and think, oh, yeah, this is good, but I know Tom Stoppard would write this better than I could, which is probably true of almost anything, but or Hal Pinter would do this bit better. But this bit may not be great, but it's me. It couldn't be anybody else but me. And that's more fun. It's more daring. It's more, high wire, can fail more easily. But if you find yourself writing with someone else's voice, thinking of, it's got to be world serious, it's got to address this or address that, you might start losing your own person. We're talking about personality and voice. So I think the more people have faith in themselves as writers, the better writers they will be. But it's dangerous and difficult. But with theatre, the great advantage as opposed to the novel is that it's collaborative. So you might write a play on your own, but you might also conceive of a play with other people and go off and do the writing, perhaps mostly yourself. But the more you can just be with your friends and talk about theatre and talk about acting, talk about life, talk about love, talk about power and politics. And who was it who said everything in the world is about sex, except sex, which is about power. Good, isn't it? I don't know why that just occurred to me. But anyway, so, you say things like that to each other, and you write, and you dream up ideas, and you enjoy the freedom of just sharing with each other the thought that one day you will write this great piece, and that you will do it together, and then you'll do it alone, and so on. But I wouldn't I wouldn't concentrate too hard on trying to change the world. You will change the world if you write something that's great. And it will be about things that you couldn't even imagine it would be about. Beckett always said that he wrote plays that were about nothing. And he never, when everyone said to him, well, this play explains this or explains that, he was charmed to hear it, but it was never in his mind when he wrote it. And actors who had him, he would come to rehearsals, and Billy Whitelaw and a lot of the actors who worked with Beckett would ask him questions. He'd say, I have no idea. I've absolutely no idea. I wrote this, you decide. And so you don't have to have a political or a world point of view. I'm going to write, I'm going to write, or I'm going to expose. You find the story that only you can tell, and the rest will follow. I think that's the best I can do.
I think that's a great note to end on.
Well, thank you, Nico.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think you deserve a round of applause.
Oh, bless you. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Thank you very much. You're lovely. No, thank you. You're very sweet. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Mwah. Thank you very much. Thank you. Oh, stop. Stop it. Thank you so much. And thank you, Nick. You're wonderful. Thank you. This guy. Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you. Oh, thank you.